So welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming today. My name is John Matsui, and this workshop today is part of a series of 4 workshops that we've been holding this semester. The first one was on teaching, the next one was on advising, the third one was on mentoring, and now we're going to hear a little bit about the research that's being done about the Biology Scholars Program. And some of you in the room I recognize, and you know a little bit about BSP. BSP is a program that I co-founded in 1992. We've had about 3,500 students go through the program. 80% of them have been first to college, low-income students. 70% have been women, and 60% have come from underrepresented ethnic minority groups. And so this is a very unusual profile for students in STEM. Most of the students have been interested in biology majors and also going on to biology-related careers. In fact, just this last year, 6 of my students have taken faculty positions in California, STEM faculty positions. I just heard about the last one last night. And so the program has been highly successful, working with students who aren't expected to succeed in STEM, and these students have excelled. And so this is what the whole series has been about, talking about our treatment of students, our selection of students, and now Mica is going to be talking about some research that she's been doing. And Mica Estrada is an associate professor at UC San Francisco. She's a friend and a colleague. We've worked on any number of projects together. And she will be joined by Andrew Epic, who will be talking a little bit about the campus climate survey that he's currently involved with. And all these things, of course, relate. And so what I'll do right now is to turn it over to Mica.
All right. So did everybody sign on to this yet? Okay, so we're going to do a little test. Oh, you're already answering. Okay, so how is your day? Is it on? How is your day? Okay, this will be good because I can hear myself when I go off of it.
Some of us are still getting there.
Yeah, so that's why I'm doing this, just so you can get in. And you can see at the top it has the instructions. All right, is there anybody who didn't get it up? It's okay so far? Seems like the majority is it's okay so far. Nobody could be better. That's pretty good for us to start. Okay. Is there anybody who's having problems? Because we're going to be using this through the presentation. Okay, great. All right. So we're here today to talk about the Gift It Forward project. And this was a study that we did with the Biology Scholars Program. But some of the key things about this is that I want to talk about the lessons learned from that and the implications it has for institutional change and how do we have an institution that we really want to be in. And in order to start that discussion, I thought the best thing to do would be to talk with Andrew, have Andrew give a little bit of a presentation about what we know the current situation looks like from the climate survey. So he's going to speak for about 10-15 minutes about some of the things that we know from here. And then I'm going to come and give some information about what we learned from the Gift It Forward study. And then we're going to do a little bit of an activity with the Poll Everywhere, but also some small group work to think about how we build an institution that we would want to be in and what that consists of. And then we'll have time for questions and discussion.
Hello. Thank you. Folks in the back, can you give me a sign if you can hear me? All right, great. If for some reason I'm a low talker and I'm mic'd for the first time, so let me know if you're having trouble hearing me. So one, thank you to Mica and to John for inviting me here today. So I'm going to talk to you about what we know about campus climate, and this is based off of primarily from the 2013 UC Campus Climate Survey. So that was a few years ago. I'll also be drawing on a little bit from UQ's, which is the UC Undergraduate Experience Survey. And I also just want to quickly plug that those are a little bit out of date, and we're doing an update to learn where we are now. So right now, the My Experience survey is live, and it's open to all UC Berkeley students, faculty, staff about climate. It's at myexperience.berkeley.edu, and this is going to help update a lot of the things that you're seeing today. We're going to learn more, and hopefully, if you've taken already, thank you, and if you haven't, please add your experiences to it. So I'm going to skip ahead just to keep this brief. This was a survey of the entire campus from 2013. It was part of a full UC survey back in 2013. We had over 100,000 respondents from across the entire UC, 13,000 students, faculty, and staff here at Berkeley. One of the things that came out of that was that 1 in 4 survey respondents experienced some form of exclusionary behavior within that past year while at Berkeley. So 1 in 4, 25%. One thing to note is that there was wide variation, and some groups experienced quite a bit higher than that. So we had African Americans, genderqueer, transgender individuals, Native American, Alaska Natives, Pacific Islanders, Chicanx, Latinx, folks with disabilities, and our LGBTQOO population. And what did that look like? So again, this is looking at people who reported experiencing exclusionary behavior within the past year. Again, this is from 2013. And you'll see that at the highest is our Native American and Alaska Native respondents, with half of them saying that they'd experienced some form of exclusionary behavior within the past year. Remember, for the campus as a whole, it's 25%, 1 in 4, whereas it's 1 in 2 for our Native American and Alaska Native. Just a little bit lower for our genderqueer and transgender respondents. About 2 in 5 for our African American, disabled, and Pacific Islander respondents, and about 1 in 3 for our Chicanx, Latinx, and LGBTQO respondents. One thing to note is that staff were actually pretty far up there too, just below 1 in 3. They're the highest across students, faculty, staff. Staff are the ones experiencing the highest levels of exclusionary behavior. One thing to note is that digging into that further, it's primarily from peers. We see that students experience exclusion from other students. Graduate students, in their sort of dual role as students and instructors, were experiencing it from both students and faculty. Faculty primarily from other faculty, and staff from other staff. And this, in some ways, is not that surprising. Who do you spend most of your time with? It's your peers. And so the people who you spend the most time with are the people who have the most chance to do something bad to you. And so this is not that surprising, but this was sort of the first time we'd really seen this. In terms of where it happened, this was a little more interesting, which is that it's primarily happening in more public spaces, academic settings like classrooms, labs, broad public spaces, in meetings with multiple people. So this is not a one-on-one, not to say this doesn't happen, but it's primarily happening where there's multiple people involved, which means that it's not just you and the person excluding you. It means that there's bystanders. This led us to a bunch of new initiatives to try to do some initiatives around inclusive classroom trainings for instructors and other things to try to mitigate bystander effect. Again, always the result here is how do we not just see what's happening, but improve things? So we see that there's a lot of peer-to-peer in these group settings. One thing, so that's looking at exclusion, which is on the negative side of things. Let's see something more positive, which is like, do you feel that people of your affinity group are respected on this campus? And this is breaking it down across race, ethnicity, gender or gender identity, religious affiliation, disability status, and sexual orientation. And here we see that are white. This is looking at undergraduates specifically, but it's broadly true across undergrad, graduate students, faculty, and staff. We see that white and Asian undergraduates have the highest ratings of students of my race, ethnicity, or respect on this campus, over 90%. Declines down, and then we see at the bottom that barely half of our African American undergraduates say that students of my race, ethnicity are respected on this campus. So very large difference between students who are feeling generally very respected and students who are generally not. One thing to note is that half of this 51% is students who are only saying, I kind of agree with that. So students who are saying, yeah, I feel really respected is only 25% of African American undergraduates. Again, for gender identity, we see men slightly more respected than women, but we see a big difference with our genderqueer, transgender, and other gender identities at 65%. So 2/3 basically the respect of everybody else. We see that no religious affiliation at the highest, over 90%, and we see then Muslim, Christian, and Jewish at lower. This is one of the only places where we see some variation across populations. Everything else is roughly the same, pretty much the same. We see that this moves around a bit more when we look at graduate students, faculty, and staff. When you're looking at, say, faculty, Muslim faculty are the ones who say they feel the least respected. So it varies around there. Disability, we see that there's a decently large gap between disabled and folks without a disability. And again, between heterosexual and LGBTQO, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, questioning, and other. You may be wondering, where's the T? The T is up here under gender identity. Those have been split out. So we see that there's wide degrees in this sort of positive things of, do you feel respected on this campus? So one is, are you being excluded? One, are you being respected? And we can look at this across multiple things. But one thing is, you might be saying, hey, you said Asian. That's a really big category. Can you break that down? And the answer is yes, and you should do that. And we do see some variations. We see that East Asians generally feeling very respected at the top, although Korean a little bit lower. We see South Asians generally pretty high. We see some variation, wide variation across Southeast Asian. One thing to note, some of these numbers are really small. So I don't know if I would, I'm happy to see 100% there. I don't know how much I'm willing to say, yes, it's definitely 100%. All Thai and Indonesian students feel respected. But we do see some variation. And again, Filipino, other Asian, and Pacific Islanders are all feeling quite a bit less respected than, say, their East and South Asian counterparts. But none of them are quite as low as some of the very lowest, like, say, African American or Native American. But it's always worth digging into this. But we can look at other things. That's just 2 questions. Are you feeling excluded? Have you been, how respected do you feel? We looked at 100 different questions, and we saw similar patterns across all of them. So what you've seen pretty much holds true across all these 100 different metrics. And one thing to note, this has all been very one-dimensional, looking at race, ethnicity, gender, each in isolation. What happens if you combine those? What if you look at intersectional, we have to add structures of oppression and see what happens when we add, sexism to white supremacy. What happens when we look at, say, black women or women with disabilities or people who are both disabled and queer. And what happens is what you might expect, which is increased exclusion, decreased respect across these metrics. Adding in these dimensions of minoritization increases exclusion. And another thing that came out was that there were these differences in perceptions of what climate was like. So we're looking at undergraduates here, and what we're saying here is they were asked, how respected do you think another group feels? So this is saying, what do you think is the climate, how respected do you think African Americans are? African Americans, the group themselves are highlighted in blue, and we can see that it's 47%. It's statistically identical to the 51% we saw before. So they're consistent. We have some nice intra-group reliability check there. But we see that everybody else thinks that African Americans are more respected than they themselves actually are. And we see a similar thing with Chicano Latinos, where we see that white and Asian students think they're more respected. Interestingly, African American students think they're less respected than our Chicanx Latinx respondents actually say they are. And same is true for our Native American Alaska Natives, but they're actually pretty similar to our Chicanx Latinx. They actually match each other pretty well. And then everybody is pretty much right about how respected white and Asian folks are. And so that's a bit interesting. We see that these groups that are heavily represented, generally feeling well on campus, people accurately perceive how they're doing. That we see for our URM groups, there's a lot of misunderstanding of what their actual experiences are. Now, as to why this is happening, I don't know. There's lots of things that could be there, from peer group segregation to, we know that certainly looking at things like pain studies that, say, African Americans specifically are deemed to be more pain tolerant by, say, white doctors or things like that. So there could be things of like, it's not that bad, you can take it. I don't know. But this is what we're seeing. Why it's happening, that bears further research. Beyond looking at individual groups, we can also look at different units on campus. We can say, so we looked at every single unit on campus, over 200 individual units, and we asked questions about, do you have, how is your climate on the campus and in your department? And this line here says where you're evenly as comfortable in your department as you are on the campus overall. So if you're above the line, you feel better in your department. You're like, yeah, things are right here, but I don't know about going out there. Whereas if you're down in this area, we see that you are saying, I generally feel okay, but in my department, not so good. So we can look and see, where, this group, this unit right here, doing way better in their unit than they are on the campus. And that's adjusted, just means that we've done a little bit of statistical control for the fact that there's wide demographic variation across units. So overall, we find that marginalized, underrepresented, minoritized groups experience worse campus climate. We see a big awareness gap. Yes, question in the back.
Going back to that last slide.
Yeah.
Did you notice any similarities between the departments that were doing, that were above the line versus below the line?
It's a little hard to say. I think this will connect to a slide we're going to see from UQs, which will look a little bit. So I have some correlations that seem to be a little bit around sort of demographics, but there's a few other things at play. So I'm not going to say I fully understand all that's happening there. So we see what we're calling an awareness gap between sort of well-represented groups and groups that are underrepresented and minoritized. And we see wide variation across departments. And any questions while we're having a little technical glitch? Yes.
Andrew, maybe you're about to show us this, but I was just curious. I did do the My Experience survey, and I didn't notice the question about how respected do you think other groups are. Mm-hmm. Is that being asked again, or did you decide to skip it this time?
That particular one is not in the new one, in part because last time it was very narrow in terms of which groups it was asked about, and to ask about all the different groups that we're looking at would have just really added to the length, and so that was one of the ones that was on the cutting block. There's one right here, yes?
I was wondering if you gave students the opportunity to select more than one ethnicity group, and if you how you sorted that accordingly.
Great question. So unlike in our official campus race ethnicity reporting, which only gives you one race ethnicity per student, in that survey, you are allowed to have multiple, check as many boxes as you like, and you're then reported in every box that you check. So when I'm talking about those different racial ethnic groups, people can appear in multiple groups. All right, so now we're going to switch and we're going to look at different source. This is from 2016. This is looking at the UC Undergraduate Experience Survey, UQs. And what we're looking at here is basically based off of the 2013 results, we see this sort of campus versus local climate differences. We added a question looking at what is the climate for diversity and inclusiveness on the campus and in your department. What we can then do is to look at the difference between those. So what we're seeing here is the sort of orangey brown. The negative numbers say that Those are groups that are experiencing worse climate locally than they perceive on the campus. Blue, positive numbers say that they're better locally than on the campus as a whole. And I've broken it down here by lots of different demographic groups. I have women, underrepresented minorities, LGBTQ+, disability, low SES. We have women of color, URM women, and APIA women. One thing to note, these are not exclusive. You can be in multiple columns. But these are sort of a lot of the groups that we saw experiencing worse climate on both the 2013 climate survey as well as other things. And what we can see is, where do we see, this is across divisions here, because it's asking how are things in your department. And we see some things that sort of, one, where are things going well? The undergraduate division and administrative programs. Social sciences, generally doing all right. Humanities is kind of neutral. We see that natural resources is kind of doing okay, although there's a couple low spots over here. Places that are not doing so hot. This is from a presentation on STEM, so that's why I've highlighted sort of the STEM divisions. And you'll see that the STEM divisions are not doing great. Not exclusively, again, natural resources is doing a little bit better, and it's not Haas and environmental design not doing great, especially around URM women. But we see that there's broad consistency across all these sort of minoritized groups where they're having worse local climate experiences than on the campus more generally. That doesn't mean that they have great campus experiences. It just means that they have a worse ones in the
use social media when I'm working.
And it also doesn't mean that things are necessarily terrible. It could mean that things are really great on campus and okay in your department. But this is sort of where we see it. And this is broadly consistent. These are a lot of the groups that we see have troubles in other areas in STEM. And I have a question right here. So yeah.
So URM women is women that are underrepresented in any particular?
No, that's a good question. So URM is a specific designation. It's an underrepresented minority, which is African American, Chicanx, Latinx, and Native American Alaska Native. So that's what URM specifically means. That's what the URM here as well as here means. So the difference between women of color and URM women is that this also includes Asian and Pacific Islander women there. So good question. And one thing to note, so this goes back to your question about where do we see departments. So part of this is definitely correlated. One thing is if you look at the departmental level, there's a pretty decent correlation between representation, how many, say, women are in a department, and how good they feel in the department relative to the campus. So if you have lots of women in the department, they feel a lot better about the department than compared to the campus. And it's kind of break-even point is around campus representation. So once you hit beyond where the campus is, and that's true for women, that's true for URMs, it's true for disabled students. So we see, broadly speaking, that there is a correlation between having a sort of more positive local environment with the sort of representatives of that department. I have a question over here, and then I'll go over. Wait, so you have the microphone, so I'm going to go. So we'll start with you.
I was just wondering if you have the same type of data for graduate students.
So this is an undergraduate survey, UQs. However, because this is so rich and interesting, this is one of the things that we're going to be including on the My Experience survey to be able to look at that for graduate students, because this would be really useful to know. Currently, no. But we do have this this is part of the My Experience survey, so I will be part of the analysis and I will be able to update this.
Take one more question.
Yeah.
I was just going to check, when you say, when you say representatives in the, relative to representatives in the department, are you saying that's just students enrolled? So students to students,
Yes.
not taking into account faculty that
Yes.
might be what their identity is?
Definitely. So yes, that's a good question. That's looking at undergraduate student representation. This is, and it's not to say that that's the only driver of this. It's a correlation, doesn't mean it's causal. It could be other things connected to that, could also be connected to faculty representation. It could be related to other things as well. So there's lots more things to look at here, but this is just looking at undergraduate student representation in that analysis I was mentioning. Did you have a follow-up? And I want to actually turn it over to our main speaker. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. So Andrew, I contacted him last week and said, would you mind coming in and do a little orientation? And he said, sure. So that's a really nice, I don't know how to get out of this though. So that's kind of just to give a context for what, if we're going to be talking about institutional change, it's good to know where we are in terms of the institution, right? And those were some of the things that how people are feeling within their institution is part of what we'll be talking about today. So let's see if I can get this. Okay, so I wanted to start with a question of, that we ask often is, who are we, right? This is from Alice in Wonderland. Who in the world am I? That's the great puzzle that we have, right, of who we are. And within the health sciences right now, there's been a shift in terms of just focusing on how do I cure the body to thinking about more holistically about the human person as a whole, right? That their mindset, people's mindset, how their emotional experiences, the heart, their sense of spirit, their motivation to go on, that these things actually have impact on the body and vice versa. And that we're not just one component. And I think that we see this kind of shift happening at the health level, but we haven't really made this shift with regard to education. Education has been mostly focused on the mind. How do we increase learning and thinking? But we haven't really thought about the full person in that. So that's part of, this is kind of the theme for the day, is to think about the whole person. Another question that we might have is, who are we? Not just who am I? And that's another really great puzzle, who are we collectively? If we look back at kind of native traditions and native ways of thinking about it, this is a great quote. It says, humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. And whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. As a social psychologist, this is a really profound and important principle, that there's a reciprocal relationship between each other. Social psychology is the study of that, of how we're influenced by each other and how we influence one another. And so my work comes from that foundation and this idea that we're all interconnected and how we treat each other actually matters. So with that in mind, that's what led me into the research in social psychology and informed the research that we've done with Biology Scholars Program. One of the ways to think about this is to think about what happens when we walk into a social situation. So you walked into this room today, and you probably did an assessment of who was here. Friendly people, not friendly people. We actually do, in our brains, we look for threat in every situation. If you had come in and there was somebody sitting in the corner with a gun, you would have noticed that, and it would have changed the way you were feeling as you came into the room. And if you had walked in here and there was balloons everywhere and people were laughing and it was like a big party, that also would have given you a different kind of information about the situation. It seems like this is a kind place. There's not a lot of threat going on here. Somebody was really happy and welcoming as you walked in and was really glad to see you. Or you came in and you saw a friend and somebody you haven't seen in a while, which I saw happen to many of you. You walked in and you saw a happy, smiling face. You scanned the room. You actually scanned the room for somebody that looks familiar, right? And you might be sitting next to that person. These things are things that we do without thinking about it, but students do this too when they come into a new class, right? They walk in and they look around, or you start a new job. If you know somebody who's in the company or in the organization or in the institution that's here, you might meet them for lunch. Why do we do that? We do that because it helps us to feel like we belong there. It helps us to feel like it's not a threatening environment. It soothes our nervous system. It helps us to feel that it's important. And this idea of kindness is a way of conveying that we're not threatened by that person when someone is kind to us. In the paper that I wrote with Allegra and John, we talk about environments being threatening and kind. And the threat is when you can see macro and microaggressions happening. And when the kind environment is where you experience micro and macro affirmations. One of the other things that we talked about in this paper was to think about how that experience might be assessed within the university setting. And some of you may have seen this before from other talks that I've given, but the idea is that when we come into an academic institution or any institution, if we're experiencing a lot of macro and microaggressions and very low macro and micro affirmation, that is a prejudiced environment, right? We know somebody's out to get us and they're showing it in every single way. What we hoped as we were moving towards affirmative action and all these things is that we were creating inclusive environments. And that would be a place where there's very low aggression, macro and micro, and that there's very high inclusion, both micro and macro. But really what we end up experiencing quite often in many institutions, not just UC Berkeley, is this more ambiguous institutional environment, which has low macro aggression. So you're not feeling like when you're in a classroom or you're at work that people are like totally out to get you, although we're kind of feeling that at the national level right now. But there's the experience of microaggressions. And how many of you have heard of the term microaggression? Yeah, so everybody in the room, right? It's this kind of subtle ways in which people are aggressive, or they sometimes innocently and sometimes not convey to you that you don't belong there in some way, that you're not adequate enough, and that in some ways they're a little bit of a threat to you. At the same time, you might see at a university all this macro affirmation. You go in, the cover of the catalog has people of all different colors, and you walk in and there's posters and there's a statement, a diversity statement of how important it is to the president and to the new strategic plan for the university, which I think we have here. And yet, when people walk into a classroom or when they're working with colleagues, they're not experiencing micro affirmation. At the micro level, they're not feeling affirmed by other people. People maybe aren't smiling at them actually, or they're not talking to them as much. You think about the kid in a lunchroom, looking for somebody to sit with. Nobody may be out to get them, but there may not be anybody there affirming them either. And one of the things that I think is important about this is that we can't just get rid of the negative. It's also about building the positive. And we've spent a lot of time and energy in the social sciences talking about how to get rid of the negative stuff, and we've spent very little time talking about how to build the positive. And in order for us to feel secure, we need both. Low negative, high positive. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. So the question is, how do you feel, and this is basically kind of what Andrew was asking, but this is just for the room. What type of environment do you feel exists here at Cal? So do you think it's purely prejudiced or between or ambiguous? Between ambiguous and inclusive or inclusive. So in your experience where you work in the department that you're in or the program you're in or classrooms that you're in, here at Cal overall, what do you think the experience is? So this, to explain this, you go to Pull Everywhere and it creates a slide and you input it into your PowerPoint, and then when you open the PowerPoint slide, it's supposed to automatically connect you. So it's magic, and I don't understand how it works. So. Oops. All right, so it looks like mostly we're falling into kind of the ambiguous. Some people are a few on the sides, but that seems like the general response. Okay, you ready for the next one? One thing I don't like about this is that you can see each other's answers, so you kind of the one that's the most always ends up like just growing. So now I want you to think about more locally, like in your particular department or in your particular program that you're in most of the time, the people that you work with and see most regularly, and think about how you feel about that environment. So we're going to do the same thing where you're looking at A, B, C, D, E.
Are we thinking about the context of ourselves or our students?
Yourself. there's a way to do it, but I can't do it when it's in this mode and when I put it into the other mode. Oh, okay. That's okay. All right, so it seems like people in this case, kind of like what Andrew did, this is a situation where most people in here are feeling better in their local environments than they feel necessarily in the larger realm of things.
I also misunderstood your first question.
Okay, you want to go back to the other one?
Well, I just didn't realize we were only evaluating our own experience.
Okay, well, we can do
I
it.
thought we were doing like that, yeah, because the question doesn't actually say that.
For you, yeah.
It just says your opinion. What type of environment exists at Cal?
All right, well, I wasn't clear. I'm sorry.
No, just so you know what
Yeah.
we were responding to.
Well, we can just do we can do it the old-fashioned way. How many of you feel like you are feeling like it's more inclusive in your local environments? And how many feel like it's kind of about the same? It's more respectful, yes. And then how many feel like it's worse in your local environment? All right. You guys are really spread out. So here's a question I have. How many of you are faculty? Okay, how many of you are staff? Ooh, almost all of you are staff. How many of you are students? A few students. Okay, so that's interesting. What I saw from up here is that it was pretty even. It was just like what Andrew presented, that some of you have similar, some of you less, some more. So I did this with the BSP scholars when we had the big gathering of several hundreds of them coming together. And I asked them, how do you feel when you're in a BSP company of BSP? And the students overwhelmingly hit inclusive, like they just felt like it was a very inclusive environment. And then I asked them, how do they feel in their STEM departments where they're getting their degrees? And most of them rated it between prejudice and kind of like prejudiced and ambiguous, somewhere in there. So they were having, from the student perspective, they were having a very different experience. And so one of the things that illustrates is that for at least for the underrepresented minority students that are in biology scholars program, that the web and this interconnection is happening when they're in their program, but they're not feeling that interconnectedness when they get into the department level. And so we wanted to understand more about what was happening in the biology scholars program that really helped that inclusion, that sense of inclusion. And another question that we had was, how do environments that foster social integration and inclusion result in greater persistence? So we wanted to look and see if that actually had any impact. If you feel like you're more included, you feel more connected, does that make a big difference or not? So how many of you are familiar with Biology Scholars Program? Okay, everybody is. We're not going to go through this then. You know who it is. It's been around for a long time. And for this study, what?
Oh, it was Cameron in that picture.
Oh. For the study, we collected, it's the same kind of, it's the percentage of people that are in the program. About 70-some% are female, and about 40% Hispanic, around 30% Asian, but first generation, and African American, around 10%. So the data I'm presenting on is this group right here. So what we've been doing is we've been giving surveys about every 6 months to the cohorts coming in for the last 4 years. And so they get one in the fall, they get one in the spring, and usually after about 2 years, the majority of them have graduated or move on, so our response rate starts to drop off as they graduate and move off. But we have a pretty good solid 2 years of data from just about every cohort up until group 4. I think we just finished group 4. So I'm only going to present on the data from the people that we have from baseline through 24 months, or 18 months, sorry. So that's 5 data points. But you can see our response rates are pretty good overall. It doesn't drop too significantly. So the theory that I work with is called TIMSI. It's the tripartite integration model of social influence. And how many of you have heard me talk about this before? Okay. Oh, good. Okay, not too many. So I won't speed through it too fast. So what I look at is, how do people integrate into community? And in this case, how do students integrate into their discipline communities? And the theory is that there's kind of 3 ways or 3 levels in which we integrate. The first is, can we do what the group does? So if you're in you're joining a basketball group, right? A basketball team, you need to be able to play basketball. if you're going to be joining the community of scientists, you probably need to do science. You need to learn how to do science and be able to do it. So you need to feel some efficacy that you can do that work. The second level is, do you feel like you belong? Do you develop a sense of identity that I am this thing? And the last piece is, do the values of that group, are they my values too? So if you think of a group that's really important to you, that it really is like central to you, you probably can do what that group does. You would probably self-identify as part of that group, and you would feel that their values are your values. And you probably can think of situations where you've been in groups where the values don't match and what that kind of feels like. They think this is important, but you think this something else is important. Changing careers often happens because of that. Like your values are not being met by the situations you're in, or you're in a company that's working and you don't agree with the values of that company. You can think of situations where that has been the breaking point, right? Or you feel like you don't belong there, like everybody else is really different than you and you just don't feel like you fit in. So these are the three. The theory is that when you have all three of these, you're going to be much more likely to continue in and persist or be integrated into that group. And in terms of science students, we think of that as persistence. So I was involved in a study that was 11 years nationally, 1,400 students, all minorities, all underrepresented minorities. And we tracked this to see if these things, if students had this as an undergraduate, did that predict their persistence in STEM a year after and then 4 years after. And what I can tell you is that all three of these are predicted. And if you do a simultaneous correlation or structural equation models on these, what you find is the unique contributors, the ones that are most predictive of students continuing on, are the identity and the values. So they need efficacy, they need to feel that they can do the science, but the unique predictors are identity and values. And when you look at 4 years out, which I'm not going to show you that data right now, the science identity and values are continue to be really important. So when your students graduate from here and they have a sense of their identity, professional identity, and the values of that profession are in alignment with their own, they are very likely to continue on, or more likely to continue on in STEM even 4 years after they've graduated. So that model we've looked at the national level, and then we wanted to look and see what happens for the biology scholars in terms of these variables. Are there any questions? Because this is kind of a framing principle. Yes?
So when you say,
Just to clarify that point of community, so when you're asking that question, it is, so what does the worldwide community sort of value? What is the very small community that I'm involved with here on campus value?
No. So this is, I can show you the measure at the very end if you want to see it, but what I did is I went to Scripps Research Institute down in San Diego and I went and polled the postdocs and professors down there about what they thought the core values were of the science community, like what makes science valuable. And then I took all of their ideas and I put it into a survey, and then I gave it to them, to lots of them, like 100 people, and then whittled it down to the 6 top ones that were like the most endorsed values of the community. And then I developed a measure on what the science community is. And there are questions like, you think that the scientific method can help benefit society, or advance knowledge, and I'll show it to you at the end. But they're kind of just the basics of why you think science is good. Yeah. Okay, so we asked at the biology scholars this question about efficacy, and again, I had the measures at the end. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on the metrics, but I have them. They're well published and stuff. But asking them about, do you feel like you can do the science? And there was 6 questions having to do with science-related skills. And what we found with the biology scholars was that it was very solid across, these are the different cohorts. You can see how they varied across the cohorts, but it's pretty solid that their efficacy does not significantly change across the time that they're in the project. And this was very true also of the science study students, the big study that I did. What happens is the students who drop out, they actually lose efficacy, but those students who come in and they're interested in science and they stay in science, they keep it. So for all of these things, for efficacy, identity, and values, what we're not looking at, when you're dealing with a population that comes in already interested, which is what you have here, right? You have students coming in, they come in knowing they want to do science. What you're trying to do is help them not to lose their efficacy, identity, and values, not necessarily to grow it anymore. That doesn't mean in K through 12 you don't want to grow it. I think it's important. There's a time when you do want to grow it. But at the college level, what we see is we want to maintain it. And for the biology scholars who are a population that is high at risk for dropping out of STEM fields, even when they come in with interest, the fact that they hold their efficacy even as they're going through their entry classes and kind of the weeder courses, that's a good sign. So their science identity also has a similar trajectory. You can see a little bit of decline, but it's not significant. There's no significant differences across any of these, and it's staying pretty stable for all of the cohorts so far. Oh, I should say, see that where it says high and low? We did a survey of several entry bio and chemistry classes about 4 years ago. And we then divided the students, those who had high intentions of going into science and those who had low intentions of going into science. And then that was so when you see that blue arrow, was the average score for students who wanted to go on. That was like all the students from the biology and chemistry classes. And then the low was like the low intentioned. So we can see that they're very comparable. The biology scholar students are really comparable to the high intention students as opposed to the low intentioned with efficacy. And then this is the values. You can see low intention students have real low value. Like they don't see themselves as scientists, and that's partially why they're planning to leave, I guess. And then the last one was values. And again, very solid, no significant difference. We do a repeated measure analysis. There's no difference across these so far. When you combine them, the ones that we have the 5 data points for, you do a repeated measure analysis, you don't see any difference. So it's pretty stable. We also looked at things like life satisfaction and stress levels. And I was really surprised about this because the students, are going through school here, and you think that there might be some fluctuation, but overall, it's a pretty stable life satisfaction. The response is that they're doing okay. They like the life that they have relative to, that's not changing a lot. And then there's a blip on this one group that their stress levels seem to go up. I have no idea what happened with them, but that happens sometimes. But overall, it's a pretty stable line. The stress levels are not going up and down too much across the 2 years. Okay, so the overall story is that when the students who are in the Biology Scholars Program, something is happening within the system or within their program development or their interaction that is keeping them invested, keeping them still integrated. They're not losing their the measures of integration, at least. They're not losing their identity. They're not feeling like the values of science are totally out from them now, or that they can't do the science. And so the program in some way is buffering that typical loss and helping them to sustain it. And so it keeps them balanced, right? Keeps them stable. We wanted to look if the engagement in Biology Scholars Program was impacting, if it predicted their kind of integration, the measures of integration, but also does it actually have any impact on them continuing on and staying. So what we found was that the Biology Scholars' engagement did positively relate to the efficacy identity values. So the more that they felt engaged in BSP, the more likely they were to have higher efficacy identity and values. And that's important. So when people feel engaged and connected with the BSP, then they seem to be more likely to feel a part of that community. Let's see, oops, I went the wrong way. So I did the same thing. So this is the correlations. And the correlations are, is there a relationship, a direct relationship? Yes, you see they're all significantly related to intentions, just like I showed you in that initial slide with the science study. The same thing was true for the biology scholars, that at their efficacy, identity, and values at 12 months was predicting their intentions to continue at 18 months. And if you do this simultaneous regression, you find the same thing, that the identity and values are the ones that are the most unique predictors of intentions to go on. So it really mirrors the other study, even though it's a smaller sample. The last thing we wanted to look at was the social climate. And these are questions having to do with the students' experiences in their scientific community. So we didn't define that for them. That could have been clubs or just how they're feeling within the school, their departments, but what's the social climate they find for science when they think about being in a scientific community? What's it feel like for them? What we found was that the biology scholars' engagement and the climate were pretty significantly correlated at each time point. So the question I had was, does that mean that they're the same thing? You know, because or are they separate things? And so I did a regression to look and see if they were the same. So if they were the same thing and they were accounting for the same variance in this, then one of these would go to 0. But what we find is that they each are significantly still related. They're each contributing in unique ways. The experience in the program and the experience in their scientific community both are contributing towards whether their intentions to stay. And so they're both important is what it means. So the summary is that effective programs help sustain student integration into professional communities, that integration into the scientific community predicts greater intentions to stay in sciences, and that BSP engagement is related to general ratings of the scientific community's social climate, but that it uniquely predicts. And this is important. So programs matter. That's the bottom line, like if you want to know the underlying thing. Programs matter, but so does the climate of the discipline and the larger climate. So how do we learn from the effective programs is the question in order to infuse larger institutions with these attributes, right? What can we learn from this to help in the larger set? And that's what we're going to spend the rest of the time here talking about. Are there any more questions? Are there any questions? Yes.
I'm fascinated with the idea that the values are one of the most critical components, because thing I've noticed with graduate students at Berkeley is that a lot of times students that are less represented in their departments will start in tandem with their research, like some kind of community building program. And it just makes sense to me that it may be that they are trying to persist by making sure that the community values match their values.
Yeah, so one of the key things about this model, I think back to the very beginning of when I was first talking about that web and how we're all interconnected. So one way to address the issue is to change students so that they adopt more of the value of the science community, right? So that's one method. The other method is to modify some of the values that are typically taught or communicated in a way that is more responsive to the values that students come in with. And I think we know from the literature that the value system of African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans is not always quite the same as the white community. It's typically there's more value placed on giving back to community, being a benefit to society. There's more need to make the world a better place, I guess, in a way, and to be able to give back. And so to the extent, and there's studies on classrooms showing that when you can tie the content of the classroom to these values that are more prevalent in different cultures, then those students are more likely to continue on. So you can do two things. You can help them to figure out why science is so valuable exactly the way it is, or you can show how science helps students to fulfill and have meaningful work that is related to what they already find meaningful. And good professors know that. And probably good staff who are working with students know that. And they help the student to make that connection because they know that when the students make that connection, they are more likely to persist. So I will say that, I mean, most of what I present is not probably anything new, but what it does provide is people who are doing good stuff, it goes, oh, I've been doing that, or I already do that, and now I have a citation. So when I go write a grant to modify my classroom, I can cite this and say, not only am I doing this and it works, but here's a citation that shows that it works other places too. So I totally recognize that for me, being able to just help people have a vocabulary for what they're already doing well is a benefit. I'm not any under delusion that people who have been working with students for 20 years don't know a lot of this already. Yes?
So you showed us the good results from biology scholars, and I was wondering if there are things to be learned from programs or groups that are failing, and how badly do they fail compared to biology scholars? And on the other end, I was a little surprised that there wasn't more self-identification as a scientist as time went on. So are there groups that do increase their?
I have not seen it, and I have 7 studies nationally, some extremely effective. The 11-year study that I did was on the RISE program that was funded by National Institute of Health, and we had half of the students were in RISE and half of them were propensity score matched students at baseline, and we tracked them across time. So that's a huge study. And we can look from that 1,400 who went on, who didn't, and there is no incline. It does stay really, really solid. I will say, however, that I gave these measures to REU, undergraduate research directors of REUs, and they were much higher on all 3 of those than any of the students. So somewhere between being an undergraduate or even a graduate student and being an REU director, their identity went up and their efficacy went up and their values went up. So there must be a place where people do grow into it even more so, but I don't know if that's happening at the faculty level. And I don't have enough faculty data to tell you about that. But it's been surprising. I thought it would grow, but it doesn't. It's just trying to keep people from losing it.
So there are groups that lose it?
The people who drop out of STEM lose it. And I haven't studied any groups that have been, whose persistence are not higher than the average. So most of the programs I look at are pretty successful. But that doesn't mean it's not out there. I'm sure it is. I'm sure there's programs that are doing badly and that people lose interest and they leave, but I just haven't looked at them yet. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so I want to go back to this slide that I showed you before about who we are and the elements of mind, spirit, body, and heart, because one of the things that I'm writing into right now and thinking about is how do we do institutional change in a way that is beneficial for the full person, not just one piece of them. And I've been starting to play around with this and think about it. And when we look at the literature, if you think about the heart, that's really having to do with how people are feeling in their environment. So are they experiencing kindness? Are they experiencing belonging? Are they having a good, positive, affective experience? And I think I actually have a publication right now that shows that the social support that people have and the emotional support that they have does predict the development of identity, science identity in the science programs. And so I think that this kind of heart experience can contribute towards the identity development and potentially values also. So mind has to do with learning, and there is a huge amount of literature on what is effective learning. There's a lot of discussion at the national level about what skills students need nowadays, what knowledge do they need to know. There's a lot of debate as to how much they need to memorize nowadays, and do they need to instead develop skill sets of collaboration or being able to access information, because we're in a new time for technology and education is changing a lot. That's not my area of expertise, the learning in the classroom stuff, but I know many people who do research in that, maybe some people in this room right now who have very effective practices for that. But that contributes towards efficacy. Do people feel that they can do the science? That's what happens when people learn knowledge and skills. They feel more confidence that they can do it. Representation, and that has to do with the body. I was thinking about this earlier because the body level is really about physical safety on some level, but also what happens when you feel like you're in an environment that's representative and has people like you in it. Like I said, when you walked in the room, you suss out who's here and who's not. You actually do suss out are people like you here. That's one of the things that we look for. Because when people are like you, you're more likely to be in a safe environment. And that's just ancient knowledge, right? So representation, I think in our ideal institution, we would have good representation of different sorts of people in the faculty, in the administration, in the staff, and in the classroom. I mean, that would be the ideal situation. And I think that having this type of distribution and representation provides opportunities for role models, which we know from the literature also is really important, having role models, and might help people to feel efficacy because they feel like people like them can do this work as a profession in the long term. and they might help them to build identity. And the last item is spirit, which I think about as opportunity for creativity and meaning making. Does everybody, have that opportunity? This may contribute towards values, development, and reinforcement. And I don't know what reinforcement means. Oh yeah, value development and reinforcing their values. So that research has not been done. There's not a lot of research on how creativity feeds into values, but there's research that could be done on that. So what this is saying is that if we had the ideal institution, or you have your ideal department or program, what it would look like is that people would feel good, they feel like they belong there, that there's, that they're a positive affective experience being there, that they're learning and they're having excellent learning experiences there, that there's people like them there at all levels of the organization, and that there's equal opportunity to have creativity and meaningful work happening. And that is my theory, is that if you created an institution, academic institution that had these elements, that we would be a happier sort of person. And that would be a happier student and a student who's more likely to continue on and want to stay in that institution and perpetuate the institution. Okay. Did I lose anybody on that? Okay. I'm at Berkeley, so I was thinking I could use holistic and nobody would go totally ballistic. So I'm writing this up right now as a letter to the editor for cell biology education. I talked to the editor and she liked it. She said I should write it up, so I'm working on it. Okay. So one of the things that I said earlier was that I felt like there's probably a lot of expertise in the room regarding these things. So we're going to spend a little bit of time working in small groups to kind of think about what we're doing already that's effective for moving in this direction. What do we know? What do you learn from your interactions that you're having with your peers, with students? And so the way we can do this is, I was thinking these two tables could maybe meet together, these two tables, if you just turn around. There's Post-its. And what I want you to do is to have about a 5-minute discussion and figure out like the top 2 or 3 ways in which you have found it's been effective to contribute towards increasing kindness and belonging for students, or if you're working with other staff or faculty. And then when you're done, what we'll do is we'll put those Post-its up on the one that says heart. And when we're all done with it at the end of the day today, we will type this up and send it back out to you, so you have kind of a combination of what people are doing on campus that are effective for moving us towards these things. Does that make sense? Yes?
Do you like a post-it per idea?
Yes, one idea per Post-it. That would be great. Okay, so I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes. And if you want to just introduce yourselves to each other, that would be probably a good thing to do. Let's see.
The first month was not good. It was really hard. I just started doing PT. I've been going to conference. I have 6 to 8 programs. Yeah, so I just finished with 1.
What did you do to your back?
I honestly think it was like a relapse from my original injury, which was like almost 10 years ago. And I have been doing like really, really, really good. I always have like tweaks here and there, and I go to the chiropractor every once in a while. But I think when I went to see my sister, it was the perfect. It was sleeping on a hospital bench. It was sleeping on a, inflated mattress. It was all that. And I came home and I worked on it on my head. I think it was just all those things. I just kind of felt like my head completely rotated. It was
Not good.
I'm working hard. Do you need anything here? Are you good? How are you feeling? Sleeping on a hospital bench. Sleeping on a inflated mattress. It was all that.
All right, everyone, we're going to move on to the next one. So can you, on the stickets, the Post-its that you have, can you just put a little H on them so you know that those are for, I'm going to have you put them all up at the end, because otherwise we're going to just be going back and forth and back and forth. So we're going to do the same thing for for the mind. This one, some of you might have huge expertise in, some of you may not be in classrooms, but if you can think of ways in which you have effectively contributed towards effective inclusive learning in a classroom or with with the students that you work with, or even with other faculty, if that is relevant, or other staff. If you do staff trainings, you can think about that. So again, if you can come up with like the top 2, if you have 3, that's okay too. And we'll give 5 minutes to this one. So we're going to do 5 minutes with each one of them and then stick them up. And then I have one of the poll everywhere to see how hard you think each one of these are. So okay, so let's go with mind.
I honestly think it was like a relapse from my original documentary, which was like almost 10 years ago. And I had been doing like really, really, really good. I almost have like tweaks here and there, and I go to the chiropractor every once in a while. But I think when I went to see my sister, it was the perfect, it was sleeping in a hospital bed, sleeping on a, weighted mattress. It was all that. When I came home and I worked on it on my bed, I think it was just all those things.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. So I almost skipped doing the learning one because I feel like it's such a big one and we have a lot of emphasis on it already. But, and actually this one there's also some emphasis on in the academic institutions. So this next question is about how do you effectively contribute to a more representative population in your program and departments? What are you doing in order to make sure that you have representation at all levels within your program or department? Okay, starting the timer. Not good. Yeah, it's not good.
Do you need anything here? How are you feeling?
I think it's going okay. I usually really like hyper prepare, and this is like minor prepared. So, but so I haven't done this before, so I kind of see what happens. But I haven't gotten as much pushback as I thought I was going to get on the concept. So. All right, I've put up the last one. And this one, for some of you, may be one that you haven't thought about too much. I've been trying to write this up, and this might help me to write it up because. Well, I wrote up stuff that I feel like this is more like content, how people do it, and that might be helpful.
This is like the applied.
Yeah, the more applied part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's much of this.
Okay. If you finish, you can go ahead and bring your Post-its and stick them up on the board here.
Yeah.
Okay, so time is up, and if you can start moving your Post-its up, that would be great.
I think using examples of whatever courses you teach, rather than using examples of maybe even like in biology, there are just research programs.
Most of those populations, Steve Andrews, I met with Andrew before they say and he's going to extract data just from those. So we'll be able to compare across campus and stuff, but he will extract some data about students, faculty. He's supposed to be in charge of actually, which is a little challenging for us because there were lots of departments, but we had to free stuff out of the future, so we'll be able to, which I'm excited to see what.
So one of the questions I thought about as you were doing this, was it fun to talk about these things, or was it boring? Good? Challenging, okay. So one of the things I thought we could do using the poll everything is to kind of think about how hard is each one of these to do. So what I have set up here is, so the question, I'm going to ask you this for each one is how hard was it for you to think of and for us to implement? The question is, how hard is it for you to implement these things? How hard is it to bring kindness and belonging and kind of heartfelt environments to students, faculty, staff, administrators? And you can see there's no middle, so you can't just be neutral. You have to choose which way you want to go on this. So, yes.
I don't want to misinterpret again.
Yes.
Can you define like hard and easy?
Yes.
Like in an institutional setting, are we talking about funding? Are we talking about just like?
So as you were going through your ideas here, like if you had to actually go and implement, if you're implementing the ideas that you had, would you think it was hard to do because, yeah, it could be because there's institutional resistance to it. It could be because there's institutional, like lots of benefit, like they really want you to do it. So given the whole thing, how hard is it for us or for you to make this happen? And yes, so that's a great clarifying question. So it's you know, it might be easy to smile at people, but if you live in a society where, you know, you're hit over the head if you smile, it becomes really hard, right? So let me see if I can move this. I wish there was a way to hide this, but I really don't know how to do it. How do you do that? Okay. I don't want to mess with it. Okay, so let's just unpack this a little bit. What makes it somewhat easy? Yes.
This feels like something that I can do right now.
Mm-hmm.
The person next to me, the person here, in an email that feels like I have some ownership and control of.
Yeah,
It's
so.
not just possible.
Okay, that's great. Yes.
Yeah, I would second that. I think typically building community and finding ways to make people feel like they belong can be lower budget and a little easier to institutionalize than curriculum or programmatic changes.
Mm-hmm. How about those people who put very hard? What makes it very hard? Yes.
I didn't put very hard, but I think sort of the counterpoint to what she said is that while it's very easy to control what you do, it's very hard to control what everybody else does.
Right, okay.
I was just going to say we're a large department with a lot of students and, you know, not that many staff. So reaching out to a, you know, huge population, it makes it hard.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually said somewhat easy, but the reason I was trying to parse out how you wanted us to think about this is like, I work with a program that has demonstrated its ability to increase students' sense of belonging. So it's somewhat easy to do that. What only thing that prevents us doing it for more students is lack of resources.
Yeah.
So that's the somewhat part.
Mm-hmm. All right. So thinking back to Andrew's slides that he showed about how a lot of what people's feeling of respect or feeling excluded came from peers. That's another thing to think about is that here at Berkeley, I talk to enough people here that peer issues can be a huge problem. People that work in the office or work in the department or whatever, that is a source of a lot of stress for a lot of people in the institution. And it's not always measured and a part of what we think of as an excellent institution, but it is something that we have a lot of control over in some ways because we are interacting with people all the time. So, okay, let's go to the next one, which, oops, wrong way. So this is going to be about the mind and just the ideas that we had. This is, again, I think the mind one is the one that is the most fleshed out on campus and institutions in general. We think a lot about how to teach well, usually, or how to, but let's see what people thought after thinking about it and talking with each other about it. All right, let's pull this one out a little bit. What makes it somewhat hard? Yes.
It requires real skills.
Yes, it does. It requires real skills. It doesn't just happen by accident. Yeah. Anything else that makes it really hard?
So I was going to say the question had inclusive, excellent learning in it, and then
Yes.
the inclusive is gone, but that was the thing that pushed it
Yeah.
for me into the somewhat hard. Making it inclusive also on a big scale is hard.
Yeah. And I had inclusive on purpose. I guess I didn't when I typed it.
Well, this says all the students.
All students, yeah. So that's, and there are a lot of writing going on right now. There's a lot of research going on. There's a lot of work going on about how to create more inclusive classrooms and more inclusive, especially entry-level courses with the fries and the cures, and there's all these different programs about how to create classrooms that really bolster everyone and don't leave people behind so much. So there's a lot of assets. Those people, somebody who said it's easy, or at least somewhat easy, what makes it easy?
I think for me, it feels like there's a lot of data out there on how to be successful in a classroom, and so that makes it easier to do that. And I would also say that, to me, what makes it hard are all the other pieces. You know, that I mean, I think that intellectually, certainly everyone who's accepted to Berkeley can learn the material. And it seems like it's the other pieces that sometimes make it difficult for people to thrive in the classroom.
Yeah. But we don't always say that. It's not always said, I would say. Yes.
I think this makes it, I don't know what, somewhat, but easier is there's actually programs here. There's pots of money that you can apply for course improvement. There's courses that you can take to improve courses.
Yeah.
And if you're younger than me, then they actually help.
So, and one of the biggest issues on campuses is often not resources for revamping classes, but faculty resistance to wanting to revamp their classes. And one of the things that, I mean, incentivizing is almost, when I review different proposals for redoing classrooms, and they always have this thing like, you know, there's always the same things that every proposal has, but one of them is like, you know, we're going to train the faculty. I've seen that in a million proposals. But one of the things you always look at is how are they incentivizing the faculty to be trained? Because most faculty actually are not going to just voluntarily go in and be retrained and redo their classes that they've been teaching for the last 20 years and start all over again after they have it kind of something that they don't have to think about too much. So it's something to think about that there's been a little push now at the national level, I think, to do training for incoming faculty because they feel like that's the time. Postdocs and new faculty are kind of more malleable and more able, more willing to design their courses with these kind of more inclusive practices and teaching practices in mind. And it's much more difficult to get the older kind of entrenched faculty working. So there is a lot of work going on at the national level. I'm on a roundtable for the National Academy of Sciences on systemic change in institutions. And so we have a lot of discussions about how do we change learning environments. Yes?
I think also that it's fairly easy to find classes or presentations that it works, that active learning works. And it's much rarer but much more useful to have presentations on what did I actually do.
What did I actually say that a little bit more about that?
Well, so hearing what people actually did in their active learning
Oh, yeah.
give us very concrete
Right.
examples
Yes.
of what they do.
Yes.
And so, and one could say the same thing about a lot of, like we discussed in the first half of this, what works, but now we're getting the brass tacks of what you actually do. So I think that the what you do part is very important.
Yeah, I agree.
Are there any departments, I'm a UCSF grad, I'm an interloper here, I guess, that have implemented video recording and feedback or like the what people do? Because I know that's part of some of the professional development courses, and I'm wondering if any departments have said, we really want this for everyone, or maybe someone else could speak to that.
That's a big question. And we have 6 minutes left.
It is available in theory, but if you go to the Center for Teaching and Learning website, you can't find it.
Oh, wow, interesting. All right, it's a great question. If we had more time, I would spend some time on it, but I'm gonna try and move us through so we finish on time here. So here's the one on representation. I know at Berkeley there's a lot of discussion about this and actually a lot of policies around trying to increase representation. Big arguments about affirmative action at various times. It's been a hot issue. So do you want to go? All right, so very hard. How many of you actively are working on trying to increase representation on the campus? So you guys know how hard it is. I'm not going to unpack this one as much. Is there anybody who feels like you want to say something about this? I had a feeling you guys kind of are in the middle of it.
I actually voted on the other end of that.
Oh, here's a mic.
Easy to try, so for what that's worth.
There's a mic.
Yeah. I think it's actually easy to try because there's lots of opportunities to go to events and to try to increase diversity, especially for faculty. And there's and MCB, there's just very few faculty that actually do that.
All right, one more.
I wanted to say it's hard because even that's when I was an undergrad here, the numbers are the same. So if it were easy, there would be more representation on campus.
Yeah.
I was now I'm not going to unpack why or the reasons or anything, but
yeah, we could spend a long time on this. I was undergraduate here. I graduated in 1989 as in my bachelor's degree here, so it hasn't changed. Okay, last one is spirit having to do with creativity and meaning. How many of you have spent much time thinking about this? Not a whole lot. Okay, I kind of thought about that. Okay, here we go. Okay, what makes this easy?
Well, on a personal level, with personal touch, I think it's very easy to find students and give them agency and empower them by giving them special projects or seeing what's important to them, and then, connecting them to things that they can do to make their whole experience more meaningful.
Yeah. And what about what makes this really hard? Over here.
You can advertise a position on the undergraduate research apprentice program and make it very specific. You still get 50 applicants. So there are just so many people who want access, and it's hard to provide the opportunity.
Yeah. How many of you feel like you have creativity and meaning in your current job? It's pretty good. It's pretty good for the room. That's good.
Could I make a plug?
Yes.
So I think one of the other things about this effort that we can bring into our classrooms and even in large lecture classrooms is the Community Engaged Scholarship Program that the American Cultures program facilitated and I got involved with. And so even in my large lecture class of 300, we edit Wikipedia to remove racism in it, and the students really get a lot out of that. So I think we can also given we have such limited resources in terms of one-on-one mentoring, I think we can come up with some other ideas, and I wanted to plug the Community Engaged Scholarship Program.
So my guess is that there's individuals on campus who are doing really great stuff around this. I know I work with Bob Full, and he has some really cool stuff happening. I think it's often invisible because it's not necessarily on our evaluation sheets, and it's not necessarily anything that we measure. But I think my guess is that there's a lot of great ideas, and I'm looking forward to reading what's up there. So, okay, so we have 1 minute left. One of the things that we kind of did with our debrief was looking at what were the challenges and the ways to overcome this. One of the questions I have, I do a lot of evaluation. How do we know that we've done this? And I can make this available to you. There's some measures that are developed if you're interested in measuring some of these things, but I think we need to build out into them. Most of it is with students. There's very little that I've seen with faculty and staff, although there's some with the belonging, like what Andrew presented today. We have the learning stuff. There's a huge amount of work that's been done on learning skills. This is just a few things that I listed here, but there's a whole, discipline around that. Representation, right now, if you think about it, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was harder to track a lot of things. We have computers now. There's a lot of changes happening in terms of trying to track what the demographics are of our schools. It's still really hard a lot of times to get demographics on programs and in departments. And the way that we categorize things is not standardized even within an institution and oftentimes not across other institutions. So I think this is one of the things that's being worked on right now is how do we know when schools are doing a good job or departments are doing a good job in creating an inclusive environment, because we don't necessarily have the numbers, but it's moving in that direction. CSUs now have a system that they're using across all the system for tracking demographics across their different disciplines. And then the Spirit one, that's one where there hasn't been a lot of measurement in terms of what people are feeling in classrooms. There is some research on it, but I think this is an area where there's a lot of room for growth and for research to happen. So I'm just going to end with this, which is that this presentation was really about the science of diversifying science. And there's a whole lot of work that's going on this in multiple disciplines. And I think we're just starting to see what we can learn and how do we use that and how do we apply that. So my hope is to take all the things, the ideas that you had, to summarize that and to get that back to you so that you can see what other people had to say. Hopefully that's useful. I'm hoping that the conversations with each other were useful. And it's always really great to find out how it went for you. So if you could please fill this out before you leave. And you can just leave it on the table or you can leave it up here. But I'm sorry I didn't have a lot of time for questions and answers, but I'll stick around after if you have a specific question. But thank you for spending the 2 hours with me. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. Hopefully it was a little fun. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.